Hello folks, and welcome back to my reloading room. Out here today tinkering around with a new trinket I'm working on here, and I thought I'd take some time and go over the Lee Load-Master. Some of the dislikes I have with it, some of the flaws I think it has, some of the pluses, and some of the things that I've done to make it work a little better. Maybe some future plans that I have for this particular press, and one addition that I think is essential to a Lee Load-Master. I have nothing to do with it, but I'm going to go over it. It's the best addition I've put on this press as far as making it work good. But let me start off with a couple of things that I've done to it that I think makes it work more efficiently. The first item of note is this nut in the center of the press. That nut and the tension on that nut play a crucial role in how smooth this press operates in general. I just like to snug mine down to where it's tight enough that it's not going to back off. In my last video, I talked about my Hornady ammo plant and the upgrades I made to that with the Dillon DC case feeder and the Mr. Bullet feeder. I removed the old bullet feeder, the Hornady bullet feeder and the Hornady case feeder, not because they were junk. I just wanted to upgrade to a smoother system on the Hornady press, and decided that I was going to put those items on this Lee press. Now the bullet feeder has been on this press for several years, and it does what it does. It's a very reliable, sometimes difficult to set up pistol bullet feeder. It's all I feed through it. I can set it up the way it comes from Hornady, primarily for 9mm, 40 Smith & Wesson, and 45 ACP. And that's really all I put through this. I do have it set up that I can do 223, but I just don't use the bullet feeder when I do 223. The case feeder from Hornady, I've done all the mods to. Maybe I've done more mods to than you normally see. I have shrunk down the size of the feed funnel at the top of it. It really made it a lot more dependable for 9mm brass in particular, which is the most troublesome brass you can feed through the Hornady. That funnel is just not a great design. I do use the Mr. Bullet feeder dies in all my presses, all my progressive stuff. It's the best, in my opinion. It is the best bullet feeder die out there. I've tried the Hornady and I tried Lee's. I still actually have the Lee just because it has no resale value. But it tended to want to drop bullets on the floor. I tinkered with it for 2 or 3 weeks trying to make it work well, and just didn't get there. So I decided to set it up to use the Mr. Bullet feeder. And again, when I get to that point, I never look back. Those bullet feeder dies are definitely the simplest and easiest to use on the market. On the bullet feeder here, I use a 10-inch pot lid. Stole that out of my kitchen, and it greatly reduces the amount of noise. The biggest complaint I have about this bullet feeder, and it's a little slower than most other bullet feeders, but it does the job. It keeps up with my reloading speed. But the amount of noise that comes out of this pot and this AC drive system will just rattle your brain while you're reloading. I've made a couple improvements to that. This keeps the noise down a little bit. I've also added a switch feed wire. And what I did was I went in and took this toggle switch out that's on the back, and I ran 2 lead wires out that use these DC, and it's actually AC, so keep that in mind. You want to keep everything covered up and protected as much as you can. And I am using Mr. Bullet Feeder's micro switch this is actually rated at 125 volts, although their feeder is DC. It turns this thing on and off quite well. So at least it's not constantly rolling the marbles around up there, it helped a lot. And I'll do a comparison video someday of actually running both of these feeders as compared to both of the other feeders. It's amazing how much more quiet the other feeders are. Using their dies, I use the Hornady disc type powder drops with the risers. These risers they have a specific design to them. They're designed to use in a specific application. I use them on all. I have 4 shell plates set up for this, or die plates, and I use them on all of them just because it gets that powder measure up out of the road so that you can get in here and make adjustments to your dies. On the case feeder for the 9mm, I added this piece of aluminum bar stock that was cut down at an angle, and it's double-sided taped in here. Then there's a piece of 1/4-inch plexiglass, double-sided taped in here. It's got a bevel cut in here and a bevel cut down here. And then on the side here, there's another piece of 1/4-inch plexiglass with bevels cut and double-sided tape. And really the purpose of that is just to shrink the size of this funnel down. This is just entirely too wide and entirely too deep for 9mm brass. What happens is they fall down in here, one of them gets jammed sideways, and before you can catch it, you're raining brass all over the floor. So you're going to spend 5 minutes cleaning it up. If you add these parts, and I've had small rifle through this since and have not had to remove them, although I think possibly if you were trying to run large rifle 308 size cartridges, you might have to remove some of these. It's just in there with double-sided tape. It's not permanent. So because Lee's case feeder system moves up and down with the carriage, I couldn't use a solid tube here. I used a piece of aluminum bar stock to make my adapter here rather than the plastic one that they provide. And this gives me a little more versatility and height of cartridge, and it's a little more solidly mounted. I mean, it's metal, right? So I use a piece of PVC here to make an adapter. It goes inside this aluminum, billet aluminum piece. And this is for small. I do the 9mm mostly through this. It'll do 223. And it's just press fit, snugly fit. This is a piece of 7/16 stainless steel fuel line protective wrap. It's available on eBay or Amazon probably. You can get it in different sizes. So for the smalls, for the 380s, the 9mm, and the 223s, I use 7/16. And for the large, 45 ACP is really all and 40 Smith & Wesson, I use a 1/2-inch stainless steel wrap. What using this spring steel does is it allows that carriage to move up and down, and it bends when it's fully loaded, it bends so that it doesn't force the brass back up through the tube against the switch in the case feeder. So those 2 feeders greatly increased my production capabilities with this machine. Again, the way I use this press now is mostly 9mm. It's mostly high volume, different power factors, different bullets set up pretty quick with this deal. So adding those 2 items to the press greatly enhanced what I was able to get done with it in the short amount of time that I have. Different times I get a chance to reload. On this press, because of the primer system and the alarm system or lack thereof, I have 2 counters. I have my regular round counter, and this gives me a total rounds that I have loaded. This round counter is set up as an alarm, and what it does, I zero both these out, and then I add 20 to this because 20 is how many small primers the press holds in the chute and in the shell plate. So I add 20 to it, and then I set this alarm for 100. And what happens that way, when I add the 20, what it does is when it uses up 80 of the primers that are in it, it sounds an alarm. So this counter would be at 80, this one would be at 100, sounds an alarm, I refill my primers. Now this is actually already extinct because I've built a proximity sensor primer alarm for this, which if you're going to prime on this machine, you really need to pay close attention to the primer. The primer system on this machine is its biggest downfall, and I'll get into that more. So the alarm system that I have replaced the counter system with consists of this proximity sensor right here. Now, there has to be a groove cut in the bottom of this chute here just to get the proximity sensor within range. And then this can be either glued, or I just zip tie it fast to the chute. It stays out of the road, it hits nothing. And the wire from the proximity sensor comes out of there and feeds over to an electronic control box. It's just a simple switch and power supply that I have attached fast to the post that my case feeder is attached to. This turns the audible alarm on and off, and it is triggered as soon as the primers are empty in this chute. So when the orange light's on, the alarm is closed and triggered. When there's primers in there, the alarm is off. I'll load a tray of primers and just show you how that works. So with the audible alarm turned on, and this is triggered right now, as soon as you reload it with primers, the alarm goes off. And as soon as those primers are empty again, the alarm will turn back on. I'll use this pick to move the alarm or the primers out of the road. So it's a pretty nice safety feature. It's pretty easy to build, pretty easy to install. It's essential to have something keeping track of the primers in this press. Again, I'll get into what's going on as far as I'm concerned with the biggest downfall of this press, and that is the priming system. So the primers fall down through this plastic chute and into this little shuttle, and it's moved back to pick one up by a case, and then this rod comes down and pushes it forward to press one into place. Now, that seems to work pretty good. I mean, there's some tips and tricks on YouTube here that help make that mechanism work a little better. But my biggest complaint is that this press primes on the upstroke. The way the press is designed, it pushes the primer into the shell casing, and then this little lever comes up and pushes against here. You can see the primer pop up. That's going to go into the case. But it is happening at the top of the stroke. The problem that I have with that is, while this is priming, you've also got all the operations going on up here in your dies. You're feeding a bullet, you're adding powder, you're working your powder measure, you're full length sizing, you're pressing a bullet, crimping a bullet, or crimping the case. You cannot feel whether that primer is being inserted into that case properly. You can't feel if there's a primer in there for sure. And what that leads to is usually a missed primer or a not completely seated primer and powder spillage all over your shell plate. I mean, I think it's a piss poor design, and I have at this point decided that I am no longer going to prime on this press. Because I have the case feeder over here now and I have an ACP, I'm just going to go ahead and deprime and prime on the ACP and then load on this, which is going to actually make this press, as far as reloading goes, a little more efficient and a little more safe, because I will gain a station. I'll actually gain 2 stations, because I'm not going to be priming here and I'm not going to be decapping here. So I'll be able to put a powder check in here. I can separate now if I want to, probably seating and crimping. So I think it'll actually increase the capabilities, just losing that function. And the problem is it doesn't function very well as a primer seater anyhow. I'd like to take a minute and make note, these case sliders, this is a Lee factory part. Lee makes a lot of different sizes of these that fit the bill for just about every cartridge. They make a really tall one for rifle cases. They make at least three different sizes of pistol case feeder or pushers. So I have tried the 3D printed models from eBay, and I just I don't know what else to say about them. Everyone I put on here has broke. I think the 3D guy or 3D printer guys are dumping the market full of aerated plastic, and most of it's junk. I just don't have anything good to say about the 3D printed parts for these sliders. I tried two different guys, and both of them did the same thing. They were poorly designed. One was poorly designed and poorly built, and the other one was just poorly built. So if you guys are going to upgrade or get different sizes of these, I really suggest going through Lee and getting real. These are molded plastic parts. They're not 3D printed, so I would really say that's the way to go. On the other hand, on the 3D printed stuff, there is a guy on eBay, and this is actually probably the best mod that I made to it, and it's not my part. I'm not trying to sell parts for this guy. I have no idea who he is. He's out in California, and he's selling these things on eBay. It's this guy right here. So this thing is just a little clip-on part. It has a spring-loaded roller in here, and it pushes on this progress bar. And I have to tell you, it is definitely the best money I spent on this press. It's $20. Get it on there again. There we go. It's $20 and a couple dollars shipping, I think. But it really does what he says it does. This little wheel that's spring loaded pushes on that bar and keeps it tight against the press, and it made the machine twice the machine it was from the factory. That's definitely the biggest improvement as far as making it operate. It's definitely the biggest improvement I made. Putting the case feeder on and some of the the bullet feeder, that certainly does add to the production, but if it's not going to run, none of that stuff matters. Before I put the case feeder on, I use Lee's collator and tube system. This is actually the one that came with it, and these things work okay. You load the collator full of brass and you shake it around and fill these tubes up, and you load a little more in the collator and shake it around and fill the tubes. You got to kind of stay on top of it. When you empty a tube, you rotate it, keep on going. I don't remember how many rounds this holds. I don't even worry about it anymore. On these collators though, so the way they come from the factory, they work great for pistol. Just a quick tip that if you do 223 brass on one of these, this is my 223 collator, and all I did was I took a piece of manila folder and I made a different size funnel and I taped it in there. Now you can see it starts at the top and changes the angle coming down to these holes. And man, what a difference. I mean, the 223 brass, if you're using this collator, you'll get frustrated trying to get the brass in these little holes. But with this piece of manila folder in there, and this has been in there since my Lee Pro 1000 days. I've had this Load-Master 10 years, so it's been in there a while, and it works. It's just a real quick, easy thing to do there. It changes the angle, and man, does it make a difference putting 223 brass in there. So there you have it. Just some things that I've done, some tips you might want to try on your own. Things I've done to make this thing run a little bit smoother, a little bit more efficiently. Again, I'm going to put a link in the description for that little gizmo that fellow in California makes there for the to make the press run smoother. It really does work. My hat's off to him. That's a brilliant idea, and it hasn't broke. I've had that thing on there a year and a half, and to my surprise, it hasn't broke. So I appreciate you guys taking the time to watch my silly videos. And if you got any questions, leave them in the comments. Thank you.